Welcome back to Saltwater Podcast, bringing you the best in poetry, spoken word, arts and culture. Featuring some heavy hitters in the world of art and social change, Saltwater Podcast aims to emulate the intimate conversation that happens within friends while introducing its audience to a cohort of vibrant talent. Featuring new episodes every 2 weeks and hosted by me, Lindsay Price, we are delighted to bring you some of the most exciting artists in the Northwest and beyond. This podcast was launched purely from a crowdfunder, so I mean it from the bottom of my heart when I say we have you, the audience, to thank. Be sure to let us know what you think. Thank you for being here for this episode, and enjoy. Hi everyone. I am so happy to be back in front of a mic and to be sharing my thoughts. Honestly, this podcast has truly been my happy place, and it's been such a long time since I've actually put an episode out. So we had a 6-part mini-series at the start of the year. That started at the start of the year. Then I had a 3 months hiatus and didn't announce it. And now I'm back. Kind of back at least. I want to start developing season 2 and having a longer series with a few more guests and a few more surprises up my sleeve. But for now, you've got me and you've got a solo episode, and I'm really excited to share. So recently, a few weeks ago, I did a live on Instagram and I actually spoke about the feeling of perfectionism and having that stop you from sharing, from showing up, from doing the things that you truly want to do. And I think that the way this relates to the podcast is that something I was also doing. So I think when I first set this up, I was in so many boxes of how it should be and what it should be about and what it was, that for a while I've been kind of saying to myself, this is just a poetry podcast, it's professional, it's about the poetry, it's about the art, it features artists, and I shouldn't really be sharing things of too personal a nature on there because it wouldn't make sense. Now, why I thought that, I'm not really sure. I don't know whether it was a little mechanism to keep me from sharing, from being open and authentic and vulnerable, or whether it was just genuinely where my brain was, where I was kind of compartmentalizing things to the point where I thought it would be too much of a crossover. But now I look at that and I think it makes complete sense that I would share intimately on an episode, be honest about myself and my life and my path. And also even if it didn't, this podcast kind of answers to no one in a way, in a sense. It's something I set up off my own back, of my own accord. It's not attached to any organisation, affiliated with anything. It's not like there's been a commission where I've been told you need to create a certain amount of episodes and they have to be on this topic. It's not like it's ran by some big arts organisation that prioritises poetry or the arts. It's literally just me funding it myself, going to the studio and or sitting in my bedroom doing an episode, which is what I'm doing today. So I, by that logic, am allowed to talk about whatever it is that I want to talk about. And for a while I've known I've wanted to do a solo episode, and I originally really thought it would be me talking about my introduction to poetry. So here's my life, here's how I got started, here's kind of how the past 10 years have been, this is what I did for uni, this is what I transferred to doing, and these are the kind of type of jobs I've had in poetry over the years, and kind of a bit about where I'm at now. Now, I know that's a really important episode, and I'm sure I will share it at some point. It's also a lot of information to get into one small episode, one small series. So I feel like a lot of that information is going to kind of bleed through my future episodes anyway, as I sit down with artists and kind of discuss my own practice and my own approach. And I look forward to sharing that episode at some point. But to be completely honest, the most juiciest stuff I can share would be the really vulnerable and personal things that have happened to me in the past 2 years. There's a couple of reasons for wanting to do that, and the first mainly is because I truly believe it will add context to how the podcast has started, what fueled the beginning, what fueled the spark of it getting off the ground, what was fueling me at the time. And also, to be really honest, I haven't really written poetry in the past 2 years. I've written small amounts of things. I've created a few pieces of work from when I've had commissions and when I've been asked to. And aside from that, I've done a lot of first draft bits, but nothing has really accumulated. And in order for that really to make sense, you have to really understand what's happened in the past 2 years, and then you'll understand why I've not really been able to write. And I just feel like it's really important to just have people meet me where I'm at now. And that's why I really wanted to share about the past 2 years. I am going to say a bit of a disclaimer at this point, which is that this podcast is going to contain some pretty heavy subject matter. So we are going to talk about death, about bereavement, about grief, about suicide, about bereavement due to suicide. I might even mention plant medicine at some point, depression, mental health, isolation, breakups, relationships, a lot basically. So if they're the kind of things that you really don't want to hear about today, then I'm going to strongly suggest you just give the episode a miss as a whole. Normally I would probably do a timestamp and tell you where those topics are, but considering the nature of today's episode, it really is going to feature heavily on death and grief. So if that's not something you're in the space for, please prioritize your own mental health, and I really encourage you to take ownership of yourself and to just skip out of this conversation and listen to a different episode. And yeah, and for the rest of you who are here, I'm going to promise, like, hopefully there is light. And I think there are some lighthearted moments, and personally I have like a very positive outlook on the past 2 years despite it being challenging. So I still think that hopefully you'll gain something out of this, and yeah, that it's not too heavy for you. So with no further ado, we are just going to get straight into it, and we're actually going to start a little bit outside of the 2 years, and we're kind of going to go pre-COVID, entering the COVID era, shall we say. So pre-COVID, I was had a completely different life to the one I have now. So I was living in Egbert, I was working full-time at a literature charity, I was doing bits of poetry, and I was relatively happy. I'd done some travelling not long before this whole thing started, and I've also written a blog post on this, and I've also got kind of like a half podcast before I set up this platform in particular and like really branded myself as having a podcast. I made kind of like a very long voice note, let's just call it, and it went out on my SoundCloud, and I talk about similar themes. So I might link it below if you really want to hear like an in-depth explanation of this period of time. If not, then we'll just carry on. But basically, I had a feeling that things in my life were going to change, and I don't know how I know that or how I knew that, but I did just know. And I remember feeling like I finally got settled, like I'm in a job I really like, I've got friends around me who are really great, I've got a routine, I've got my little yoga class that I go to, and the supermarket that I buy my food from, and I'm like really in a routine of knowing where things are and knowing how I do things. And I'd also started to do really well in my job at that point as well, and I was really enjoying it. But I did have this feeling that this isn't going to last forever. And that's not to say I thought I was better than anything or any reason like that. It was just a sensation, a sense. So COVID hit. The first lockdown kind of treated me quite well. Obviously I was concerned, but from like a personal perspective, I kind of handled like the chaos pretty well. I remember feeling really grounded. I remember going to the park a lot. I was writing poetry. I was setting up online open mic nights and supporting people who were doing the same, and it just felt really creative. I felt like we were really making the best of the situation. And then my 30th birthday rolled around, and I honestly had like, that was like the peak of the good experiences for me. I felt so loved. I think because we couldn't celebrate because we were all like, lockdowns were still happening, people really went out of their way to make me feel very special and loved in that time. So I had people send me like I had friends send me like scrapbooks and beautiful messages and flowers and cards and just really sensitive, thoughtful gifts, and things were happening. People were dropping things off on my doorstep, and I just really felt the love from the people around me in that time. I also had a tooth infection that put me in bed for a week, and even though I was in a lot of pain, I had a lot of time to like slow down and reflect. And I just remember thinking like, God, my life is so like, it's gorgeous, and there's so many people who care, and I'm in such a good place, like emotionally, mentally, even physically. Like I just really felt like very content about that time in my life. And then this week rolled around, and literally in the space of 1 week, so many components of my life changed. So the first one was that I'd actually given my notice into work, and for some reason I had this feeling like I need to be finished by the 1st of September. I cannot roll on into the new month. Like, I've just got to be gone. And I didn't really know what that was about until it rolled around. So that was happening. That was on the cards. I also went away with someone that I was kind of dating at the time, and then I got back and had realised that that relationship was over, and I kind of needed to have a conversation about it. Then the third thing was that I had said to my dad, I don't want to live in my house anymore. I was like, I want to give my notice into my landlord. I want to move. At that point in time, me and my housemate were even talking about moving to Wales. Don't really know how I thought that was going to go. Yeah, I don't really know how I thought that was going to work, especially because neither of us had a car. But for some reason, I was like, I'm done with the city. I feel like I've been there too much, and I really feel like I need to go away and like explore new horizons and just rest. Rest, reset, recharge is like really what I wanted to do. And my dad actually rang me and said, like, don't give your notice in just yet. And I remember thinking, why? What does he mean? And he kind of rings me up later on and he says, your grandpa's in an old people's home. He knows he hasn't got long left. I think he's figured that he's not coming out, and the house is just sitting there, and he's actually asked if you would like to live in the house. Now, from that point on, everything in my life changed. And like, I think this is why I've struggled to make this podcast, because I don't know if I will ever be able to convey just how deep this story goes, just how deep my relationship to this house goes, just how many layers there are to this topic. And I also want to note that I do feel like I'm incredibly privileged in this moment as well. Like, to have been able to live, I didn't inherit it, wasn't in my name, but to have been able to have lived in that space for 2 years, in a house that I would never have been able to afforded on my own. I work as a freelance artist. Like, if you're in this boat, then you know what it's like. But I just want to give a nod to that, to be like, I am aware, even if later on I kind of say how challenging it was. I really do want you guys to know that I'm fully aware of just how much privilege I hold and have held in this time. And it's not something I've taken lightly either. So yeah, that awareness is definitely there. But yeah, so I was told that I could move into this home. And 2 days after I said yes, my grandpa actually passed away. So we've had some pretty chaotic life changes in this time. I moved to this space really far away in the Wirral. It's the peak of lockdown. It's the peak of winter. At this point, it's kind of like October by the time I get in, November. And it got really challenging. Firstly, I would say, like, from a grief perspective, even though I knew my grandpa was old and really kind of felt quite emotionally, I thought I was emotionally prepared for his death. What I didn't really realise was like just how close we were. He was my last living grandparent. I was an only child and an only grandchild on that side. And just the bond we had was really, really deep. I like my grandpa a lot. I didn't just love him because I had to. I actually liked him as a person. I thought he was funny. I thought he was switched on. He was very politically aware, politically active. We both have conversations about how much we don't like the government. And I just really felt like a genuine connection. I thought he was cool. I thought if we were the same age, we'd be friends. He used to drive a motorbike. Like, he was just a cool person. And I really did, like, his absence was really felt. And I really did miss him. So I think that kind of caught me off guard by just how like grief-stricken I actually was. And from an external perspective, I can really see now like how hard it all got, and how dark it all got. So a few months kind of go by, winter is challenging. I'm still kind of hoping in my head, like, I want to do this podcast and I've got all these poetry projects I want to do. So there's like some semblance of optimism around me, even though it is hard. And then in January, I found out one of my friends actually took his own life. And now that really threw me. It was a different type of grief to anything I've ever experienced. If you've lost someone in that way, like, and my heart really goes out to you. It's a really challenging experience. And coupled with the fact that, a lot of us knew he was quite ill for some time, and coupled with the fact that I'd lost my grandpa and I hadn't really healed it, I just really descended into a spiral. And I think sometimes when you go through dark phases of life, you don't realise how bad it is until after, because it creeps up on you gradually every day, more and more, until suddenly you're at the bottom of a well and you are like, wow, how did I get here? How did it get so low so fast? And how on earth am I going to get out of this? And that's really how it felt. And I think I bottled up a lot in that time. I think I kept a lot in. There was a little bit of a theme because I felt so geographically distant from a lot of my friends and family. Doing things became a bit harder. Hanging out became really hard. And I was seeing people a lot less. So then I started to feel really guilty for like the only time I was seeing people, I didn't really want to be like, I think I had a thought in my head that I was dumping my problems on people. Whereas when I look back, it's like, no wonder you needed help. Like, you were literally like grieving someone due to suicide. Like, it was preposterous for me to even think that I was going to get through that alone. That's the first time I've ever used the word preposterous on a podcast. I don't really know who I am right now. But yeah. So I'm in this like pit of grief essentially. And my friends at the time, I was starting to feel a bit distant from. I was starting to feel very frustrated at the lack of people who were able to really hold space for me. And then I realised that something had to change. So I decided to do a couple of things. The first one was that I put myself into grief therapy. The second thing was that I enrolled in an ayahuasca retreat. And the third thing was that I actually got things moving in my life and started to shift things in the house. So one of the challenging things about living in the house I was living in was the fact that it was covered in my grandpa's belongings. Now, I don't know if anyone will ever truly understand like how strangely intimate that really is. Like, we moved in the middle of winter during a pandemic. The option of renovating that space. So this space was like, looked exactly the same as it had done in the 70s when it was first decorated. It was 40 years old. There was orange floral carpet upstairs. There was mustard velvet curtains, dark wood everywhere. One of those really old fireplaces with the metal gate round. And to some people, they're like, that's a vintage dream. Oh my God, you should have kept it. And it's like, yes, but it was thick with dust. The wallpaper was peeling. And just like from an energetic perspective, if you believe in this, I really truly believe that buildings can hold memory. That inanimate objects can also hold memory. And there was just a very old sensation in the house, and a sensation like things need to go. We need to pull things, like pull the rugs up, we need to peel the wallpaper, we need to like freshen everything, from the perspective of it logically making sense, and also from like my grief as well. I think I really needed to see that house completely like transformed from the inside out, and that's what we ended up doing. So right as I kind of started getting myself out of this funk, things finally started moving, and it was almost like as soon as I accepted that I needed help, as soon as I started to look for therapy and counselling and healing, things like naturally fell into place. Like suddenly the workmen who were really busy suddenly started replying to the calls, and people started helping the house, and the amount of support I started to receive in that time was really, really apparent. And like I'm still so eternally grateful for the guy Ben who worked on our house, because he pulled so many strings from so many different people and really just got it finished to such a high quality in such a short space of time. And yeah, just seeing how much support people were willing to give was really beautiful and moving. So yeah, things started to feel like they were on the up, and I went away, I did an ayahuasca retreat. If you want to listen to the podcast specifically on that, I will link it below. I'm not going to get into it now today. It really is quite a long experience, and I've already told it once, but let's just say it really helped me to understand it helped me to make further sense of my experience with death and my understanding of death and what that is. I felt like I was given a great deal of peace. I asked where Leon was, I asked where my grandpa was, and I got answers, so whether or not you believe in those things, or you think it's magic, or you think it's the brain, I got the answers I needed, and I was able to make peace with what had happened and move on in a really healthy way. I'm forever grateful I did that experience, I did that retreat, and truly I see ripple effects of that weekend even to this day in different areas of my life, even from the themes I took through that retreat, if that makes sense. And yeah, everything started to feel really, really good. I also met a partner at this time, we fell in love, and I just had a few months of, I would say, absolute bliss. So we're approaching year 2 in the house now. Things have gone really quickly. I also want to say my confidence in myself really got high at this time, because I've never seen myself as particularly DIY or handy in those ways, but I was literally stripping walls myself, pulling up carpet myself, taking things apart. I took a cupboard off the wall by myself, nearly died because it fell on me. Moving heavy objects, cleaning things, painting things. I really did it all in that time, and in a way it really isn't my personality type. I would much rather pay someone, but I just truly didn't have any money. But it's built up a lot of confidence, literally being in a whole house on my own felt quite a responsibility, and I'm really proud that I was able to kind of finesse it and do well in that time. And there was also a garden, and I also really wanted to make things nice for the sake of my grandpa as well. I wanted him to know that I was taking care of the house and trying to water the plants and look after the flowers. And yeah, I feel if I could say a plus of this time, it would really be that my confidence in myself to be a functioning adult was oh wow, I can actually get shit done. That feels really, really good. I want to share a little bit about my relationship. I'm going to do that in a really sensitive way. I think it's important, because I preach a lot of vulnerability through poetry, addressing your feelings, and a lot of my poems themselves are really quite vulnerable and intimate. I feel it's really important to practice what I preach by showing up fully on here. And at the same time, I'm very aware I'm talking about somebody who is a living, breathing person out in this world who doesn't necessarily have a chance to have their own podcast where they can tell their side of the story. And I just really want to be respectful. My relationship started to crumble around this time. We'd gone through a very intense period of time. We were very much in love with each other. And I think intensity can be too much sometimes for people, and it really was a lot emotionally for both of us to deal with. I think we did really well in some ways. I think we did a really good job of working through our insecurities, communicating, doing a lot of the challenging conversation that I know some people are really afraid to do. And at the same time, I think we'd both just reached a limit where we couldn't really be pushed anymore, and we couldn't take any more strain or pressure. So we start to go through a process of uncoupling, shall we say. And I think because I'd done well to deal with a lot of the grief, but there was just a lot of things ending in my life. It felt over the past kind of maybe 4 years a big death cycle, shall we say. And I think when this final thing was ending, I had a really tough time accepting it. And yeah, it was a really challenging period of time to be in. Again, I'm a bit isolated in my house. I'm not fully telling people the extent of what I'm going through. I'm kind of scared to tell people the extent of what I'm going through because I don't want to worry people. But I also really need support. So I was really yo-yoing between like isolating myself and then feeling really resentful that people weren't there, but also not giving people the opportunity to be there because I felt like a lot of shame around asking. So there was just a lot of my own cycle of thoughts in this time. And recently I wrote a blog post on this, or I started to at least, and I want to put this out around the same time as that post so they can kind of complement each other. But one of the sentences I wrote which really stood out was that I wrote down, I realised how quickly things can go to shit in the absence of community. And that's really just like stayed with me. And I really think it's so important to reach out and to have friends and a support network around you. And yeah, one thing that this like isolation phase has taught me is just how important other people are. And that it's not wrong to ask for help or ask support, because we would do that for our friends. So why do we feel shame when we ask for it ourselves, you know? Just a thought. So I went through a bit of a challenging time. This relationship is kind of yo-yoing. We're getting back together, we're breaking up, we're getting back together, we're falling apart. And then Christmas rolls around and it was actually quite nice. I got a job as a Christmas elf. And it may or may not surprise you all to know, but this is the third Christmas elf job I have ever had. I actually got paid more in this job because they said I was more experienced than the other elves. So I got to be like a head elf, which is just like, you know, like my life dreams have been realised. Like someone is saying that I'm experienced at being an elf. Like, oh my God. Yeah, it was actually adorable. It was very wholesome. It was very sweet. I was working outside on a farm every day in the freezing cold, and it was actually like a lot more graft than you would think. There was a lot of physical exertion, running around, long shifts, working outside. It takes a lot out of the body, but it was adorable and I really loved it. And I think I really needed that like little nugget of like cheerfulness, of happiness. Like it was really lovely thing to like fully immerse myself in. And then the new year rolls around and that relationship kind of finally ended. Now I go through waves over the next couple of months that follow. I go through waves of feeling optimistic, feeling like things are good, really making an effort to put myself out there for poetry opportunities, for work, and then also having things feel like exceptionally hard at the same time. So there's a lot of duality, there's a lot of balance. I had like a really busy month or two so I was working for Coventry University, which was a really great job. I was actually facilitating some journaling, kind of writing for wellbeing workshops, mindfulness with the students there, and it was such a fulfilling, rewarding experience. Like I would go, we'd do meditation, we'd do some mindfulness, we'd do some journaling. I had it like really vibey in there. I had like my little purple like projector light, and it was just really cool. It was like a star projector lamp. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. But I was traveling one day a week for going to Coventry and doing a lot of other work in that time. And I think this is just the nature of being freelance. Like, at least it is for me. I either have absolutely nothing on to the point where I'm bored to tears, or I have it the other way where I am completely overworked. Everything comes at once. I'm like working 10 days straight. I'm working till like late at night. I'm at the house for like 12 hours, 16 hours at a time. And also where I'm living is like, it means that there's a long commute. So I'm in this really busy phase and I'm really happy to do it. I do some filming for my poetry. I film a really cool video. I go and watch the Queer Bodies new cohort of artists perform. That was really cool. I'm doing this Coventry thing. I'm working at this recording studio, which is like a freelance job I've had for years. And yeah, just like a lot of busyness. And I think by the end of that month, I also went for a new job at that time. And I think by the end of that month, I was kind of done. And that was also the month where I first put out the podcast. So there is growth happening, and it's also taken me a while to recover from it. And yeah, the best way I can sum up those kind of next few months is that there was loads of beautiful things happening, loads of light. Spring and summer in that house are absolutely incredible. I made like a little TikTok of all the flowers in the garden because there was so many. And I was really trying to enjoy where I was. I was also still very much dealing with the feelings of isolation. And this is the place where I don't want to sound ungrateful for the experience, because I had such a beautiful time living in that space, in that house. You know, I had about 3 different housemates in this time, and I've made some really amazing, incredible memories in this space. And I'm really fortunate that I've lived, you know, in this house that I grew up in as a child, where that was so deeply connected to my grandparents. You know, I used to love visiting there, and I'm so fortunate that I've had this experience. And I think that partly is the reason why I was so reluctant to admit that I was actually struggling. And I think by this point I've realised that it's not just because of situations, it's not just because of grief or relationships, friendships, or any kind of external factor. One of the reasons why I'm struggling is purely from living in this house. So because I don't drive, even getting the shopping or doing something small was ending up being quite a faff, because it was quite out in the suburbs. It was in a space where you really did need a car to get around, otherwise everywhere was a really long walk away. I also developed sciatica in this time, so it was really hard for me to do anything without being in like immense pain. And I think the main factor was that town felt so far away. I started to get really kind of nervous or anxious anytime I was on public transport, because I'd be like, wow, the house is far. Everywhere takes so long to get to. I don't really like being out the house for this long. And more importantly, I wasn't really seeing my friends in this time either, because seeing a friend really meant that I would have to like stay overnight at theirs, or they'd stay overnight at mine. And like, while that's really nice to do, it kind of tends to mean that you do it less. So I wasn't really able, like, I don't really know that many people near where I was living, like, at all. So it meant, like, popping for drinks after work with someone was completely out of the question. Grabbing a quick coffee or walk in the park with someone was completely out of the question. It was either me traveling for like an hour and 45 minutes to do something and an hour and 45 back, triggering my sciatica, and then spending the next day in bed or on pain meds or just in pain. Or it was like packing an overnight bag and staying the night, and it being like a bit of a faff and taking me away from like things that I need to do. So I really feel like for such a long time I was kind of trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, and I was really pushing myself to still try and show up at events and go to things even though everything was long, everything was a faff. I was kind of tired, I was having a lot of pain, and just feeling a bit unsupported, a bit lonely, a bit isolated, a bit disconnected. And as a result, just spending a lot of time in my head. And again, it's not to negate, like, I feel really privileged saying that. Obviously, I was still in a really lucky situation. I'm lucky I had anywhere to call a home. But loneliness is real, like, it truly is. And what I went through felt incredibly real at the time as well. So I go away to this little weekend camping trip, like little kind of hippie festival thing. And that period of time chilled me out so much. It really relaxed me. It put me in a space where I was really just open. I was connecting with other people. I was like happier than I'd been in a long time. My whole body and nervous system were more relaxed than they'd been in a long time. And I was a lot more aware of like my thoughts as they were coming up. So while that was a really great weekend, the lasting changes really kind of occurred when I got back. So I got back to the house and I really realised like, wow, my stress levels feel through the roof here. I feel really anxious. Doing something really simple like going for coffee is like stressful because it's so far away, and like it would mean that the dog was on her own for a long time, and there was just like a lot of logistics. And I think that holiday, that break really showed me like, wow, the level of stress I am operating under is actually quite serious. I don't really see how I can continue to live here and like meet someone, for example, continue the relationships with my friends, work as a poet, you know, or go for fun art opportunities, or even go to art galleries or museums or theatres. Like I can't really see how things are going to progress. And I think I felt really guilty for not being able to make it work. But I feel like in that house, I was trying to kind of make myself be someone that I'm not. Like, that area very much felt very suburban, like very much somewhere you would live if you were like married with kids and you had like, you know, 2 big 4x4s and you drove into town for work and you went on big family holidays. Like, it was that kind of space. And in some ways, I really grew up in that place. I feel like I've became a woman, shall we say, or became an adult. But like at the same time, a lot of that stuff isn't me. I've, not to sound ungrateful, but I've always seen myself as like a bit more nomadic, about someone who likes to travel a lot, who likes to switch up locations, who lives in a lot of different spaces. And I've always really liked that about myself. And for some people, being in one fixed place for a long time is probably really grounding and calming. But for me, it just really went against like my spirit and the nature of like who I am. And I just had this realization when I came back from holiday, like, I don't think I can live here anymore. And it was a letting go process. It was very hard to let go. We're still in this process now because there's still a few things that are being wrapped up, which I'll get into later. But yeah, it was a hard decision. But then as soon as I made it, I was met with a lot of grace. And really weirdly, like, as soon as I made the decision, I kind of said it in therapy, like, this house, it's got to change. Really shortly after that, I picked up the phone and rang a friend, and I was just like, hey, things are really hard here. I really need to be around people. Please, can I come and live with you for like a month or 2? And then as soon as I got off that phone call, I actually saw 2 friends I know, like a couple who were looking to rent in the same area that I lived in. So without thinking, I kind of like rang my mum really quickly and said, can I do this? Spoke to them and said, do you want to rent this house? And they said yes. So I almost just did like a really fast switch. So they were going to rent my house off me. I was going to rent a room off my friend, and everyone, all the ducks were starting to line up. And yeah, where we're at now. So since I moved back to Toxteth, which is where I'm now living, I'm right by Princess Park. I have a ton of people to watch Luna, the dog. The story of how I got Luna, I can tell at some point as well, because it's all quite magical and synchronistic. But basically, I've got a dog now. She's a Pomeranian. She is a nightmare. She's like the biggest diva I've ever met in my entire life, but we love her. Yeah, as soon as I moved, like everything, and I mean everything, like slotted into place. And really weirdly, like suddenly my social calendar got really busy, like without even telling a lot of people I'd moved. Within like the first week, I had people be like, hey, we're going here for drinks, do you want to come? Hey, we're going here for a meal, do you want to come? And it was like, I haven't even told you I live here. How did you even know to invite me? But like loads of invitations went my way. I was going to like Lark Lane a lot. I went to Maranto's with my mum and dad. I was going to like loads of little bars and restaurants and like the cute little witch shops, and going for walks around the park, and like everything that I normally would have taken for granted, you know, and what probably a lot of people do, like, oh, I'm just going to quickly see a friend, or I'm just going to quickly pop here or pop there. Like, yeah, I got to do a load of really beautiful things, and I can't really explain it, but everything just felt so aligned. Like, it really truly felt like there was magic in the air. I still remember one of the first weeks, like going for dinner with my friends, having pizza, drinking an old fashioned, walking home through Sefton Park, and ringing my mum on the phone, and she was like, have you met someone? Because there was no other way she could understand like why I sounded so happy. And I literally sounded like giddy and like drunk off life. Like I'd had one drink, but I was like, I sounded like just so like happy, content, like just out of this world happy. And I still don't think my mum believes me, but like truly it was just from feeling like everything in my life is aligned again and where I'm supposed to be. Finally, like my creativity's come back to me, my purpose, like I'm an artist, this is what I'm here to do, these are the things I want to achieve. Like I finally have brain space because one, I'm living in a house that I share with someone else who the sole responsibility of the house is not falling on me. I'm living in an area that's vibrant, that's got things to do, that's got art, that's got nature. I'm not like super isolated. There's a lot of young people around. There's a lot of things happening, whereas before that just wasn't the case. And I just feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be. And for whatever reason, that's freed up a lot of space in my head. I don't have to worry. And I think part of the reason why things got so challenging last year, and to go back to that quote I said earlier about community, largely feels because I'd gone through some pretty heavy emotional trauma, let's say. I didn't really have any sort of space to process it, because in order to process it, I kind of had to go back into the feelings. And living on my own, I didn't really feel like safe enough to explore those feelings in private. And I've really felt like any healing experience or conversation situation has came from being around other people and having other people witness me in a certain state. And I do think that like since I've moved here, a few things have come up for me personally, but I felt so much better equipped to deal with them because I have had the luxury of a support system, of a support network and people and things in place. And yeah, I know I'm so incredibly lucky. I know I'm so like, it blows my mind like how much I've been able to transform and shift. I'm really proud of myself that I was able to let go of that space in a way that was challenging, was bumpy, was emotional, but hopefully has absolved me of any guilt. Like I don't feel guilty. I don't feel like I'm a bad person. I don't feel guilty for moving out of my grandpa's space. I don't think he's angry at me. I think I've like developed a lot of confidence in myself in that time, and a lot of confidence in myself as well. Like during the summer, I went to Paris for a few days, and I absolutely I love it as a city. I've been there before. I really like it, but as soon as I got there, it just wasn't the place that I needed to be in that moment, and I took myself home, despite the fact that I was supposed to stay a lot longer. And that act, plus the act of moving out of this house, plus a few other things that have happened lately, have really built up this feeling of such strong self-reliance. And after a year or two of kind of doubting myself, doubting my own emotions, doubting my abilities, I'm now in such a space of so much self-love and confidence and like trust in myself that I know, because I've seen it, that I have the ability to keep myself safe, that I have the ability, if I don't like something, I can move myself, I can change my situation. And it's given me some more ownership back of my life. I think for quite a while, because a lot of things were happening to me that were out of my control, that were slightly challenging, harrowing, heartbreaking, I have really got into a phase of believing that I am not in the driver's seat of my life. And these past few weeks especially have taught me that I get a say. I get to have agency. I get to decide where I wake up in the morning, how I wake up in the morning. I get to decide who is in my life. I get to decide who isn't. I get to decide what I focus on. I get to decide what I do. Even down to really small things. And obviously we still all exist under capitalism, so how much choice do we really have? But you get what I'm saying. As much as I can have choice of my life, I believe that I've had it, and it feels really good. I feel really clear. I feel really focused. I feel really sure on what it is I'm here to do. And I've been speaking my mind a lot more recently as well, and whether that's looked like having uncomfortable conversations with friends, pulling people up on things, which I've had to do, I really feel like I've handled myself with a lot of grace. And that's one thing I feel like the last 2 years really can't take away. Like, I have really gone through some dark times. Maybe I haven't even in this podcast explained just how dark they've got, but if you can imagine, grieving someone due to suicide, going through grief, being in a very challenging relationship where you felt like you didn't necessarily have a voice, they were some real dark spirals I pulled myself out of. And the fact that I'm here and I'm breathing and alive and happy and healthy and being nourished by the people around me is like honest to God, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. And I'm just so happy. I feel like I've got a lot of confidence in myself, and I've got a lot of happiness and awareness. And even though it's been hard, I truly wouldn't have changed these past 2 years for anything. And that gets on to what I'm going to do now. So I'm currently actually looking into doing a master's. I want to do a master's in theatre practice. My original degree was in community and applied theatre. Shout out Birmingham School of Acting, BSA, part of BCU University. That's where I got my degree from. But I've really wanted to go back and study. And the thing I really feel like I want to do is to create a play. So looking at these themes of death and grief, suicide, and the fact that I think about death, honest to God, like nearly every single day of life. Not even in a morbid way, like I don't want to die, I love my life, but I do think about the concept of it, like, God, does anyone else think about the fact that we're gonna die one day? I wonder if that's on people's minds. And when I bring it up with my friends, I am told no, not everyone thinks about it as much as you, Linz. But I believe it's happening to me for a reason. I believe it's happening to me for a reason, and I would really like to try and explore it through theatre, through poetry, through arts, through maybe cross collaboration with a couple of like people of different disciplines. Maybe we can weave music into it. I don't know what it's gonna look like yet, but I think especially because I worked a lot with items and with memory and with the home. There feels like something theatrical in that. There feels like something worth exploring artistically. So that's really something I want to delve in. And I really see like a stage, with like the really old fashioned furniture, and maybe it changes over time. One thing I noticed about the house was that when I was blooming, so was the house. So as soon as things started to be on the up in my life, like I got into a relationship, I was really happy. The house was decorated beautifully. And like, I thought I had on it was that one day I was looking around and I was like, wow, it's really beautiful. And like, I've really impressed myself with the ability to make something beautiful, because I did not have a lot of money when I decorated that house. I decorated it with things I already had, things I bought on Facebook Marketplace, and just like having a good eye. Like, I'm quite good at making something look quite bougie, even if it wasn't. There was a lot of whites and light colours, and then like some really like pretty pieces as well. Like, it just had a really beautiful feel to it. And to be fair, like nearly everyone who stepped into that house said that it felt spiritual to them, or they felt some sort of change happening, or they felt like they were having an experience, because it was very purposely calm, zen, like really beautiful candles, incense. Like, it always just felt really clear and clean and beautiful. And there was no TV as well, and I think that really like calmed people down. But when I was looking at this house and thinking, wow, I've made this really beautiful thing, I thought to myself, the house has only been able to transform so much because it already possessed the ability for transformation. Like, if the house wasn't able to hold that much of an upgrade, to hold that much light, let's say, it would have fallen apart. We would have pulled the curtains back, or we would have pulled the wallpaper off, and there would have been cracks. Like, it just wouldn't have been able to withstand the transformation it went through. And then I thought, like, oh my God, like, what a metaphor for me. Like, the reason I've bloomed so much recently is because I have also held the capability or the capacity for deep transformation. And yeah, I feel like there's been a lot of like correlations between and metaphors between like the house and me, and that's why I feel like there's a deeper relationship than just like bricks and mortar. I hope that's made sense. I feel like I might have been a bit tangenty, but I think that this is the only way I can truly get across like everything I've experienced. I don't know if I've been able to like articulate how hard some of this has been, and how thankful I am to people like my therapist, people like Cruise Bereavement Service, who provide free therapy to people experiencing bereavement or grief, and the talking therapies that are available on the NHS. Like without those, it would have been a lot harder. Really grateful to my friends and family. And I also really wanted to dedicate this podcast to my grandpa, so Jack Pierce, and to Leanne Priestnall, who is my beautiful friend who passed away. I also lost a couple of other people in this time period as well, who I'm going to say in our intro and outro. But it's been a heavy year. It's been a year of grief, a few years of grief for a lot of people. I am a changed person. I am a different person than I was when I first went into this process. I wouldn't change who I am for anything. I feel like I've inherited a deeper level of compassion, of awareness, of understanding, and I've inherited more light as I've gone through the dark at the same time. So truly wouldn't change this. I'm happy with how I carried myself through it. I'm amazed at how I've carried myself through it. And yeah, there's a lot of pride there. And yeah, if you are struggling with grief or you've experienced grief yourself, please know that you are not alone and that there are a lot of other people who've experienced the same thing as you. I am going to put in the description box some links to resources for mental health. I think it's really important, and it would feel really irresponsible to put this podcast out without signposting to some places where you can receive help. So if you are struggling or affected by any of the themes we spoke about today, please make sure that you are using the relevant services for you. And yeah, thank you so much for hearing me out. I feel so fortunate, grateful, thankful that I can have a safe space to speak about my feelings. And I think it would just add context as to why I haven't written in 2 years. Like, there's been a lot going on. Looking back now, I actually find it quite hilarious that I was like forcing myself to write, like, oh no, I need to make an album, and I need to put a blog post out, and I need to keep cracking on with the podcast. And it's like, Lynn's, like, the fact that I'm like feeding myself every day and getting out of bed and getting a shower, like, that was more than enough. Like, I really, if I could do one thing differently, if I could go back, it would just be to tell myself to like be a bit softer on myself, and like, you're doing your absolute best, and sometimes progress doesn't look like all of this capitalist creation mode, constantly output, doing. Like, truly, just because other people are doing that, they're just in a phase of their life where they're able to have a lot of output, and those people will also go through phases when they're not as able. And if you're in a phase of life where you need a lot of internal reflection and rest and softness, then that is okay. And there's nothing wrong with you from being, in quotes, unproductive. There's some messages I would have loved to have given to myself. And I hope that if you're listening and that resonates, you can try and take the invitation to be a bit kinder to yourself, and not think, yeah, but Lindsay went through a load of grief. Like, what you're going through is also relevant. And oh my God, if you need to rest, please just rest. So that is the end for today's episode. I think this is going out, by the time you hear this episode, my course will have already started, but I am still just going to give a little shout out to Season of the Witch, which is my 6-week deep dive into poetry and the supernatural. And we pushed it back a week to make sure that all of our beautiful attendees could make the first one. But that is starting at the moment, and I'm so excited about it. We're having some guest facilitators. We are exploring like Sufism and Egyptian hieroglyphic poetry, and the theme of the witch, the theme of the scorned woman, what it means to be othered, witch trials in modern society, and just some good old-fashioned spooky fun. So yeah, really excited to facilitate that, to launch it. Hopefully we'll have a little sharing with the attendees as well. So maybe keep your eyes out for that, because I'm hopefully going to do something that's available to the public. And just so amped up by the people on the course, like really exceptional, brilliant writers. So I cannot wait to see what they all create. And yeah, hopefully I'll be doing a lot more hoping this podcast gets the attention it so desperately deserves. We've had some beautiful feedback from this series, and I'm just so grateful to all of my guests, like truly beautiful, amazing humans who just fill me with such excitement whenever I hear their work. And for tuning in, truly wouldn't be here without you. Thank you for all the love and support, and I hope you've gained something from this episode, and hopefully you've learned a little bit more about me in the process too. I'll see you all at the next one. Thanks, guys. So that concludes today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please go and show our guests some love. All their information will be in the description box below. And I think today's was a really, really great one. Please like and subscribe on YouTube and do all of the things. Leave us a nice review on your podcast sites. You can follow us over on Instagram at Saltwater Poetry, or you can follow my personal one, which is Lindsay Writes Poems. Thank you so much for all of the love, and I will see you all at the next one.